So, as we kind of go back again, I shared that I went back again. It was my birthday weekend. I was turning 22, decided to spend the night with him, and it was his first time meeting the child. So, he got up, he left because she was having her regular colicky night that was that was known. So, it was a couple days I hadn't heard from him. I called him. I said, "Hey, what's up? I hadn't heard from you." And he was like, "Yeah, because I couldn't sleep. I had to go to work, and that baby was crying all night." And I explained once again, "Hey, that's kind of what she does. That's why I asked for you to spend the night with me to kind of help out, even though that was probably one of my little ploys or whatever." And so he says, "I told you to abort that baby. I told you to do that." And so that's why she's crying. Something's wrong with her. You just should have aborted her, and none of this would be going on. You wouldn't have been calling me, asking me to come help you. You just should have got rid of her when I told you, got rid of that baby when I told you to. So it's your problem. You deal with it. And he hung up the phone. I was devastated. I was devastated. And so, um, from that from that conversation, I decided. I said, "Okay, you want to play with me like this? This is what I'm gonna do. I am gonna pursue child support because I wasn't gonna bother him. But if you were gonna be so rude, so nasty, I said I'm gonna start pursuing child support. So I started to, um, and so from the time that Deanna got home, it was just, it was difficult with the colic. But as she began to get older, it was getting a little better. But she still kept looking up all the time, kept looking up, always constantly having to bring those eyes back down to eye level just so she could look at you. I was working full time, taking her to the babysitter in the morning and coming back home, doing mommy stuff. It was a hard time. Also, during that time, I wanted to go hang out with friends, and my mama was like, no, you laid up and had that baby. You had all the fun getting her, so you're going to have all the fun keeping her. And if you want me to keep her, you going to have to pay me. I said, like a babysitter? She was like, oh, yeah, you got to pay me. I was like, to keep your own grandchild? Mm-hmm. To keep my own grandchild, you're going to have to pay me. So I was like, well, I guess I won't be going then. And so I didn't go out because I refused to pay her to watch the baby. Um, so I can remember during that time hearing a voice saying that your baby was going to die. And just as anybody would do, you will rebuke the devil. You rebuke the devil. This baby's not going to die. Kept coming up, kept hearing it. Prepare, your baby's going to die. Less than a month, on March 7th, Deanna died. She died a crib death. I remember getting a call from the babysitter saying, hey, and let me back up. I can remember the morning taking her and dropping her off at the babysitter. And that morning, that weekend, she had had such a great weekend. She slept all night. She had started cooing that Sunday, the day before. It was the first time I heard her voice, and she was cooing. And I was like, oh my God, we are finally out of the wilderness. We are finally out of the wilderness. She had such a great weekend, and I enjoyed it. I was like, finally, finally. And that morning, driving her to the babysitter, she was just looking at me and she was smiling, and she looked back up like, I'm coming. She looked at me and she smiled, and then she looked back up. And then a couple hours later, I got the call, and the babysitter said that she wasn't breathing. She didn't know what to do. And from that moment to this moment, my life has changed. That whenever something has come up, it's like I get a divine download. And so the Lord began to tell me to tell her, did you call 911? No. I said, well, hang up the phone, call 911. I'm on the way. I grabbed my stuff and I started running out of the office, and they were like, "What's wrong?" And I said something. I said, "My baby's not breathing." By the time I made it to the next floor, because I worked at a hospital and I was in the basement, um, it dawned on me to call the pediatrician. So I called Dr. Sorrentos' office and I said, "I need to speak to Dr. Sorrentos. Something's wrong with Deanna." And everybody knew who Deanna was. She was like this miracle baby. Um, and they just knew her. And so they put Dr. Sorrentos on the phone, and I said, "Dr. Sorrentos, the babysitter called and said Deanna's not breathing." Dr. Sorrentos asked me for her phone number. I was able to rattle it off, gave it to her. So she called the babysitter, and by that time, EMS was on the way. And so Dr. Sorrentos told her to tell them to take her to a particular hospital. And then Dr. Sorrentos called me back and she said, "I'll meet you there." Dr. Sorrentos also called Melinda, who was her best friend, and she too, who worked at the hospital, left the hospital. And all of them, at one hospital, all of them were en route to the next hospital. So when I got there, um, I was advised to sit down, to go into the registrar's office. And so I had to do all the paperwork to register this child at the hospital. It took about 45 minutes. By that time, my mom had come because I also called her on my way out and she met me at the hospital. So got her registered. I sat down, and about 5 or 10 minutes later, Dr. Sorrentos came out to get me. And that's when she gave me the devastating blow that she had died. She had died. 4 months, 12 days she lived. And so that was March 7th. And it was kind of funny on March 7th in Gainesville, Florida. On that day, there were 7 children that died that day in Gainesville. Um, there was a guy who was, I think he was a middle school resource officer, Officer Timmons. His daughter and some other children were killed on 39th Avenue in a terrible car accident. And I heard he was never the same after that. And there was another child that had gotten killed in Indiana. So on that particular day, March 7th, there were 7 children that were killed on that day. And so I go in and I pick up my baby, and I noticed she had a gash in her forehead. Gash in the middle of her forehead. And I I don't even think I cried. I was just stunned. Just stunned. And so Dr. Sorrentos told me to sit down, and she put her in my lap, and I'm holding her and I'm looking and I'm stunned. I just cannot believe this. Just had no words. Had no words. And so after that, it was like maybe 5 minutes, and the police officer came in, the sheriff came in, and he was like, "Okay, I need to speak to her." So he took me out of the room and he was asking me questions. He literally interrogated me probably about an hour. Not the babysitter, and she was there, not my mom, but he interrogated me. And the part that upset me the most is that he was the resource officer at the high school that I had attended just 3 short years before. And I have a very uncommon name. And so he should have, and I wasn't in trouble in high school, but I got around. I was, and it never dawned on me. But he interrogated me for a whole entire hour about what happened to the baby, and not talking to the babysitter. So by the time he let me go back in, it was time for me to make a decision about a funeral home. My mom had been in the room. She was holding her and she was yelling and crying. The babysitter was crying, apologizing, saying that she was sorry. And I'm like, you didn't do anything. You didn't do anything. Why are you crying? You didn't do anything. So, made the decision about the funeral home, but I was inquiring, well, what happened to her head? What happened to her head? And Dr. Sorrento said that when the EMS was bringing her out of the house, they hit her head in the door of the mobile home because the girl lives in the mobile home. They gashed her head. On the door to bring her out. And so she died. So she died.